listening to LSU Daily with Matt Musso, your home for all things LSU sports.
Off and running here on another edition of LSU Daily. Welcome in and glad to have you with me. LSU and Alabama Saturday night in Death Valley, one of two showdowns in the Southeastern Conference this weekend. The other, of course, being Ole Miss and Georgia, but all of our attention here, of course, is on the Tigers and the Tide, a game that has come to mean so much to the landscape of college football for the better part of going on 2 decades. Now, there's been one LSU Alabama game since 2011 that has not been played in prime time, and that was, of course, the 2019 game. Saturday night in Death Valley, back in that prime time slot once again with a lot of eyes on a game with massive college football playoff implications. Today, we take a look at both sides of the ball kind of for both teams, or I should say matchups on both sides of the ball for both teams. We will talk about the matchup that everybody's been talking about, and we touched on it during the bye week. LSU's defense against the legs of Jalen Milroe. Wednesday, we started looking at LSU's corners against Milroe and the Milroe and the Ryan Williams connection. He's 17, by the way. That's really like the Kim Mulkey, Kramer Robertson's mom thing. Like, you can't watch an Alabama football game without somebody telling you Ryan Williams is 17. So obviously I'm, having all of us lived through the Kim Mulkey, Kramer Robertson thing, I'm going to make light of Ryan Williams being 17 as much as I can. Anyway, we looked at Milroe's arm versus LSU's secondary. Now we'll look at LSU's defense versus Milroe's legs. That really is the storyline that, like I said, everybody's wanted to talk about it. But then LSU's offense versus Alabama's defense. What must LSU do to find success against a Tide defense that has struggled at points this season, specifically in conference play? And although, again, they're coming off of a shutout of Missouri, context matters in certain parts of that ball game. Not to say Alabama didn't play well. They did, and they did make improvements. But we'll run through all of it. There are some things to glean in that game to where LSU can obviously have a little bit better success than Missouri, who lost 34-0. So kind of want to go through all of that with you here today and fired up to do so. Subscribe. Please subscribe, share, like, all of that greatly appreciated. Follow me on social media as well. If you don't already, at Musso Matthew on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook and, of course, on Instagram if you so choose to, at Matthew Musso 1. All right. Let's dive right into it. And we're going to start with Milroe's legs. And, on Wednesday's show, like I said, we talked about the passing game, and it was kind of like, so why are you starting with the passing game? Everyone knows Jalen Milroe is the running guy. He went for a $155 and 4 rushing touchdowns against you a year ago. All those things. Brian Kelly, I thought, gave great answers on Monday and on the teleconference Wednesday when talking about Milroe last year compared to this year, where he's like, look, they played multiple quarterbacks in 2023. You didn't really know what you were going to get. They had finally fully switched over to Milroe right before the game against LSU, so there wasn't a lot of film. Now it's consistent. Now you know what they're looking for out of him. Now you're able to craft a better plan. And Alabama, when they matched up with LSU last year, Jalen Milroe was run first and then hit the deep shot over the top. Your first read, if it's not there, look for a hole and take off and run. And it worked really well. The scrambles were a big part of that 155. Big part of it. And of the 4 touchdowns. Now it's much more condensed in the scheme, what they're looking for out of Jalen Milroe. So yes, that should allow LSU to prepare better. But when you look at Milroe's splits, I don't want to tell you he's pass first, but it's pretty darn close. Jalen Milroe is averaging 25 pass attempts per game to 12 rush attempts per game. That has been the tendency. He's gone over 100 yards rushing one other time this season, and that was against Georgia. And look, He had a great day against Georgia, running for a $115. Like he was awesome that day. Here's his line. My bad. I subtracted 2 yards from him. 117, and 2 scores on the ground against Georgia. He was awesome. So it's in there, right? And everybody's looking at LSU coming off the game against Texas A&M where Marcel Reed went in there in the second half, middle of the third quarter, and completely took over and did all the damage. I won't say all the damage, all the scoring damage with his legs. He did have the long pass down the seam, but all the scoring damage came with his legs. And it's like, oh my goodness, the rushing quarterback problems are back for LSU. What you found out, they weren't prepared for it, and we're not going to rehash that battle. If you listened, you know how I feel. But in that same vein, my take was always this. Do not let that obscure your view of what the matchup with Alabama will be. Do not let that cloud you thinking that Jalen Milroe is just going to come in and run all over LSU. LSU has 2 weeks to correct those mistakes and prepare. And I think they will be better prepared. And I expect them to be better prepared. And oh, by the way, so does Alabama's head coach.
They'll have some time to prepare, know who we have back there. So yeah, I expect them to be dialed in on another level from what they were against Texas A&M. We're kind of got surprised with the quarterback change. So they got athletes and, they got good coaches and have been coached up well against the opponents. So, we got to still keep doing what we do and just mix it up and change it up, little tweaks like we would any other game plan.
Little tweaks. Keep doing what you're doing, but little tweaks. What they've been doing, having Jalen Milroe throw the ball 25 times per game and run it 12. Teams break tendency in big games. The very obvious tendency that you would expect them to break is the 12 attempts per game on the ground. With the success that he had against LSU last season, seeing what they had struggled with against Texas A&M, look for Bama to probably incorporate some of those type of concepts that A&M ran, get in there and try to really lean on Jalen Milroe, especially with a chance of rain. I know the storm is mainly turned away. It looks like it's heading to Mexico, but you still could get some outer bands and some showers that make it difficult to throw the football a little bit on Saturday night in Tiger Stadium. We'll see kind of where that goes. Weather forecasts here are ever changing, especially with a storm out there, but keep that in mind. So it's up to LSU to stop it. How do they do it? Well, let's kind of hear from the players on that because LSU has had success against running quarterbacks. Really up until the second half against Texas A&M, it looked like LSU had fixed all the problems that ailed them against South Carolina with the tandem of Lenoris Sellers and Rocket Sanders back there. Gio Lopez at South Alabama. We've talked about him. I get it. It's South Alabama. But I also want to remind plenty of LSU fans out there that a lot of people were worried about that football game when you shouldn't have been. But, and we talked about it on this show, Lopez and South Alabama's running back Fluff Bothwell, what a great name still, goodness, were a really good comp with Lenoris Sellers and Rocket Sanders. Lopez probably just threw the ball better. Not probably. Lopez did throw the ball better and does throw the ball better than Sellers. So it was a good test after that outing. And LSU passed it with flying colors. Gio Lopez ran for 33 yards. Then you face Jackson Dart after a bye week. And I get it. Jackson Dart isn't this world beater of a runner. Like he's not I wouldn't classify him technically as a true dual threat, but he can hurt you with his legs. And LSU held him to 27 yards rushing in that ball game. Then you went to face Taylon Green. And everybody wanted to tell you Taylon Green wasn't fully healthy, and that's great. That's fine. He had 2 weeks to heal up. He looked like he was moving pretty darn well out of there when he was scrambling and extending plays. And then you look at what he did the very next week against Mississippi State, and he went for 79 yards rushing. He looked even more healthy than he already did against LSU. Anybody remember what LSU did to Taylon Green in that football game? LSU held Taylon Green to negative 10 yards rushing. So how do you replicate that success against Jalen Milroe? Greg Penn, Tuesday evening, your middle linebacker, your 18, your green dot, talked about where LSU is focusing in on preparing to face, another running quarterback.
To make it simple, really just with a running quarterback, creating extra gas and things like that, guys just having their eyes right and doing their job is basically the simplest way I could put it, to not give away the game plan, but really just doing your job and not trying to do the next person's job, just making sure you know what you're doing.
It's a message we've heard plenty from Brian Kelly throughout the year. You're 111, right? Do your 111. Don't worry about trust the guy next to you that he's going to do his job. Keep your eyes in the right spot. Stay in your lane. Go fit your gap. Go all of that. LSU got away from that big time against Texas A&M in the second half. Savion Jones was also asked about Jalen Milroe and the problems he presents with his legs and what the defensive ends need to do in this game to help contain Jalen Milroe.
I feel like it's extremely important because we all know that he got good legs on him. He quick to get out the pocket, but we can't rush scared of his abilities to run the ball. We can't let his legs hinder our ability to pass rush. So it's just, making smart rush moves, knowing what kind of rushes we could do during what kind of plays. So.
Boom. That's the one right there. Can't rush scared. When you hear Greg Penn talking about everybody being in their spot, doing their job, not worrying about the guy, trusting the guy next to you, I should say, that's a very linebacker answer. When you hear Savion Jones talk about it from a different position, saying we can't rush scared. We still have to have confidence in our rush, just know which plays we're supposed to rush where on, and get after him. That's a very defensive end answer there. Said he's quick to get out of the pocket, but you can't rush scared. You have to be aware of that, but you still have to go after him. And when you look at LSU against those three quarterbacks we just named, Lopez, Dart, Green, it was 33 yards against Lopez. LSU sacked him 3 times. 27 yards against Dart. LSU sacked him 6 times. Negative 10 yards against Taylor Green. LSU sacked him 3 times. LSU has got to get Jalen Milroe on the ground. When LSU had success against those guys, it played out just like Penn and Jones said. The linebackers and everybody behind them were in their right fits, their right lanes, were doing their job and trusting the guy next to him, and the defensive ends were going get it. They weren't losing contain, and they were rushing. They were on it. LSU's pass rush is going to be massive in stopping Jalen Milroe from running the football, where they can get upfield, keep contained, force him out, and have the linebackers, safeties, and everybody else in the right spot and come up and stop him. I'm oversimplifying it. That's a lot harder, obviously, than I'm making it sound, but that's it. And LSU has a great chance to do it. LSU has 28 sacks on the season. That is 4th in the SEC. Alabama has allowed 17 sacks. That's 8th in conference. That is an advantage you absolutely have to take advantage of. You have gained 11 more sacks than they have allowed. You have to take advantage of that. And if you do, you're going to have a great chance to stop Milroe's run by working in tandem. And in doing so, you will force him to throw the football. Like I said, teams break tendencies in big games. I expect Alabama to try and exploit the run game. It's up to LSU to stuff that out early and force him to throw the ball. And in complementary football, also take the ball down the field and go put up points against Alabama. How does LSU do that? Let's talk about it. This is where we can switch sides of the ball and talk LSU's offense versus Alabama's defense. Number one, you're going to have to find some semblance of a running game. And we talked about that earlier in the week as well with Aaron Anderson, Xavion Thomas. I'd love to see them involved, not only in a quick, short passing game as an extension, Caden Durham in that regard as well, but I'd also like to see you hand the football to him. Get the ball to Thomas and Anderson in space. Y'all, Xavier Thomas, it's a small sample size. It's 4 carries, but he's averaging 12 yards on those 4 carries. See if you can't get him loose. Aaron Anderson doesn't have a carry on the year. And look, again, even if it's not an actual handoff, think about the first score in the UCLA game with Xavier Thomas. It was that little touch pass, little shovel pass forward, and he gets around the corner, he's into the end zone. Use your athletes in space as an extension of the running game. You have to get something going there. Alabama's rush defense has struggled this season. That is just fact. Everybody's going to point to them being 65th in the country, and they are. But I think what's more important is versus your conference opponents. Alabama versus conference opponents this season has allowed 151 yards per game on the ground. Alabama in their losses, their 2 losses, which were against conference foes, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, they allowed 190 yards on the ground. If you are to beat Alabama, you have to run the football. But there's one other thing you have to do, and it's not turn the ball over. Alabama is one of the best teams in the SEC when it comes to takeaways. In fact, they are tied with Ole Miss at the top of the SEC with a +7 turnover margin. LSU is at +2. Not bad. It's not great. That's a big gap. Alabama's been excellent at taking the football away. You've got a quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier who's coming off a 3-interception football game. He's going to have to protect the ball. LSU, you're going to have to hold on to the football. Alabama, they've forced 18 turnovers in the game on the season. 7 of those have been fumbles. It's a very opportunistic defense. Now, when you go and you look at games on Alabama's schedule, there can be a bit of a clear picture there. Start with Georgia. Georgia found themselves in a hell of a hole, dug out of it, took the lead, and then Ryan Williams torched them. But in that football game, what contributed to Georgia digging such a big hole was this. Georgia ran the football for 80 yards and turned it over 4 times. 3 of those were interceptions by Carson Beck, and they lost. On the flip side of that is Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt ran the ball for 166 against Alabama, didn't turn the ball over at all, and put up 40 and won the football game. Really sort of the outliers here are the games against Tennessee and Missouri. But context matters in those games. Missouri most of all. But let's start with Tennessee. Tennessee ran the football against Alabama for 214 yards. They turned it over 3 times. They won the game. Alabama won the turnover margin in that game, but Tennessee ran it for 214. Of those 3 turnovers, only 2 of them came from starters. So when you had your actual starters in, the turnover margin was equal, and Tennessee outrushed Alabama 214-75. The one turnover that put it over the top there was from the backup quarterback when Nico Iamaleava went out of the game. And on 3rd and 9, they put the backup in and let him throw the ball inexplicably in a 7-0 game, and he threw it right to Malachi Moore. Tennessee's defense got the stop, and they're lucky for that. Run the ball. Run the ball, Heupel. It's 3rd and 9 in a 1-possession game on your home field. Run the ball. But without that interception, I know it happened. I'm not saying take it out. I'm just saying look at some context. Equal turnover margin. They ran the football. They won the game. Missouri. And let me say this before I even get into the turnover story with Missouri. Alabama did really good things against Missouri defensively. Things that they had struggled with. They rose up in certain points of the game, kind of like the end of the second quarter, where spots they had struggled. They got off to a fast start. That's something they've struggled with, especially on the road. All of those things. Like they did. They were more disciplined. They trusted the guy next to them more. A lot of the conversations we have with LSU. They played a great defensive game. They shut out an SEC opponent. That is hard to do. I don't care if it's Georgia to Mississippi State. That is hard to do. They did it. Now, that being said, Missouri ran the football for 167 yards. They turned it over 3 times. And here's the context I would give you. All 3 of those turnovers came from Drew Pine, who is not good. I'm sorry. I'm sure the kid works hard. He's probably a great guy. He's a bad quarterback at this level. He does not belong at this level of football. He threw 3 interceptions in the game. Those started late in the first half. So while Brady Cook was in, and it changed the game. While Brady Cook was in the game and Missouri was able to run the football and they had Brady Cook, albeit hobbled, in there, they weren't scoring, but they were in the football game because they were able to run and didn't turn it over. It was 6-0. It was 6-0 when Drew Pine came in late in the second quarter. Yes, they were still able to run the ball, but they turned it over. Those 2 things have to work in tandem. There is evidence that when they do, you can beat this team. And if LSU's able to run the ball, I expect Nussmeier's turnovers to be low. I expect LSU's turnovers to be low. Tigers have been really good at holding on to the football. You haven't seen many fumbles. That's kind of why I single out Nussmeier there. It's not to actually single him out. He's been great. But that's why. Because if you can run the ball, we know LSU's offensive line is going to give him time. He's going to sit back there. And when he sits back there, he's been pretty darn good. That's the key for me right there. And again, I know that's oversimplifying, but easier said than done. But the evidence is there. All right. That's going to wrap it up for today. Appreciate everybody being here. Smash the like. Smash that subscribe button as well. Share. All those things are greatly appreciated. Follow me on social media and be here next time. We'll give our final thoughts, a pick and a prediction, a couple more matchups to look at for LSU Alabama on Saturday night. That's next time on LSU Daily.